everyone. I'm going to be doing Friday's video today because I want to make sure that I can stay on top of things as far as videos are concerned because I think I will be relatively busy this weekend. So I'm going to be doing Friday's video today. Basically, I wanted to talk about for this Animation Friday, death scenes. I think the most famous death scenes usually come from animated films. We usually remember them for, I think, some reason. I think it might be due to possibly nostalgia factors in that, the first time we see somebody die, it kind of on a screen, even though they're not a real character or a real person, it impacts us in a way because it's sort of introducing us to that concept of death. I think that's partially a reason, but I think there's a certain way in which animation executes death that I think is actually really interesting, something that I wanted to explore today. Now, I'm not just talking about villain death scenes. I'm not just talking about the gravity, which is a very common villain death. I am also talking about the deaths that heroes have within animation as well. Those I think really do impact the film. I mean, we've seen like death resurrection with heroes, a lot of them, but there's some that passed away and never returned. For example, Bambi's mom, Mufasa, just to name a few. That's just kind of the approach that animation has taken with death. I think also, usually within animation, we don't see both of the parents, and usually most of the time the reasoning, although it's not fully explained, sometimes it's really as a result of death. For example, in Cinderella, her dad passes away. I'm trying to think of other examples. Same thing with Tiana's dad passes away. So yeah, there's a lot of these kinds of death aspects to animation that I think seem to be part of its origins and part of its tradition. I think largely in part that was sort of started by Disney and then carried on through other studios, because we've seen death in DreamWorks, we've seen death in Pixar too as well. Again, it's not always the villains. There's also heroes who pass on. For example, in Up with Ellie, she passes away. So yeah, death is treated in a variety of different ways in animation, and I think more so than in live action. Because usually with live action, they do show death, but usually, especially within like genres like, for example, action and horror, there's a lot of deaths that end up occurring, and there's really no attachment that you have to the characters that end up passing away. Whereas with animation, I think there is this emphasis of care for the heroes if they pass away, and a care and a sort of horror for when the villains end up going. And I think that just has to do with the fact that we're more involved with those characters than we are within other genres of filmmaking. So I think that's why death within animation has been so unique over the years. It has given us that real, um, that real raw um, emotion, and I think it's worked for animation in the majority of cases. Sometimes deaf people within animation is dealt comedically as well. It's not all serious. For example, Lord Farquaad is probably killed in the most ridiculous way I could think of, being eaten by a dragon in Shrek. There's, tons of Looney Tune cartoons where it's sort of the death reincarnation, that character would have totally died under those circumstances, but he doesn't. He just is like, haha, he's just burned up a little. So again, there are points where it kind of doesn't take death too seriously. Um, but I feel like there's sort of this history with animation that has dealt with death in a variety of different ways, whether it be funny, whether it be serious, whether it be uh, a death that happens on the hero side, whether it be a villain who ends up getting the axe or the gravity, so to speak. It seems like that these scenes really do hold up throughout the years. The scene where Bambi's mom passed away, even though we don't see her die on screen, you still feel that sort of huge intensity. When Mufasa passes away, you actually see the body and sort of the aftermath, and the fact that it's very hard for Simba as a child to really understand this concept of death. So there's just different ways in which animation tries to um, execute death, and it's interesting, I think, for the most part. Um, it it deals with it in a variety of different ways, and it knows how to, I think, deal with it in a way that I think ultimately works. Sometimes you think that some might be a little bit unnecessary or a little bit too over the top. Um, at least sometimes that's how it is for me in some cases. But I think throughout um, throughout the history of animation up until now, I think there has been this sense of treating death in different ways. Um, I also like how death is treated as sort of a threat to the hero, and that's sort of their means of survival is sort of to escape death, because that's oftentimes what the villains bring upon within animated films. They bring on um, this death. Frollo is a perfect example of that. Scar, perfect example. So there's tons of different cases where the villains try to impose death onto the hero, and they're sort of a representation of death in certain respects. So I think that's what's really fascinating too about how animation has treated death. It's and it's actually sometimes even lived up to that ability to have actual people who were really good to ultimately get the axe, so to speak. Although I think usually death is avoided for usually the main heroes or the main characters, because I think for children that's kind of hard to take in if ultimately if a main hero does pass away. Um, so and I guess might be a little bit too dark for some. And I totally understand why animation hasn't really gone down this route. Um, will they in the future? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But I think at the end of the day, what really does matter is just um, how it sort of treats death. And I think throughout the animations, throughout the animation sort of era, or and through its evolvement, we have seen death play a huge role, and done in a variety of ways. So I think it's really interesting, and is definitely worthy of commentary. Um, but ultimately, I think that's really all I can say when it comes to this topic. I think it's very interesting that there are these kinds of things that can be brought to light when it comes to these when it comes to dealing with such serious topics in children's films. And I like how animation really was trying to address those issues and really put those in perspective, because I think it's definitely something that's important for children to know about. And I don't think we should shy away from it at all. Um, but at the same time, I still think we should give our children a sense of optimism too. And I think usually animation does that. And at least when it's playing with death, it's not treating it as some horrible ends, at least when it's on the hero side, because they sort of live through the memory of others that do end up taking sort of the place of those that were close to them. And then when the villains end up going, we feel sort of this sense of relief that that the threat of death is over, since death has now passed to them. So it's really interesting. I find this very fascinating. And yeah, usually it's not handled as bloody, but there's still some intensity to it, and I think it ultimately works. And I like how animation does sort of push the envelope sometimes, because I think that's a good thing. I think we need animation to push a little bit on challenging children, as opposed to talking down to them. So yeah, I think it ultimately does end up working. But again, I think if it keeps to um, its sort of traditional kinds of ends, then I think it ultimately ends up serving its purpose well. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say. But again, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.